Lord, my heart wants only you to follow in your path, Lord, to follow without fainting, bowing at your throne, Lord, and never looking back. Amarte solati, Signor, amarte solati, Signor, amarte solati, Signor, y no mirar atrás, seguir tu camino, Señor, seguir sin desmayar, Señor, postrado ante tu altar, Señor, y no mirar atrás, seguir tu camino, Señor, seguir sin desmayar, Señor, postrado ante tu altar, Señor, y no mirar atrás. I love only you, Lord. I love only you, Lord. I love only you, Lord. My heart wants only you to follow in your path, Lord, to follow without fainting, bowing at your throne, Lord, and never looking back, to follow in your path, Lord, to follow without fainting, bowing at your throne, Lord, and never looking back.
And here we are once again, my brothers and sisters, for another Living Hope Today study. Today we are in the book of 1 Chronicles, and we are in chapter 10. If you recall, the first 9 chapters of the book of 1 Chronicles is basically names. It's a genealogy all the way from Adam all the way through to the people that come back to Jerusalem and resettle it after the Babylonian exile. The author of Chronicles is unknown to us, but the emphasis and the story is pretty clear. He's going to now recount the history of the kings, adding some things that we didn't learn in 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, subtracting some things that we did learn there, but they won't be included in Chronicles. But before we get to today's chapter 10, let me take you through just a big picture look at the Old Testament. If you read an English Bible or a modern Christian Bible, you'll find 5 sections or so in the Old Testament. You'll start with the law or the Torah, sometimes known as the Pentateuch. Then you'll have the history books, right? They're listed there. Then you'll have the wisdom and poetry books. These are in order. And then you'll have the major and minor prophets, ending with Malachi. Well, right now, we're in the middle of the history books, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. But I want you to see something here because it's insightful in why the Chronicles are so important. If you look at the Hebrew Bible, you'll see that the chronology is, or the order of the books is a little different. This is known as the Tanakh. All right, in Hebrew, it starts with the Torah. That's exactly like the Christian Bible, all right, the Old Testament. But then it changes. Instead of going to the history books and calling them history books, the Hebrew Bible will go to what's called the former prophets or the Nevi'im, all right? And it'll have Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, where we might look at them as history. They look at them as former prophets. Then it goes to the latter prophets. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel are included there. And then there's something called the 12, where the minor prophets are all listed next. And from the Torah to the Nevi'im, at the end of the list, we get to Ketuvim. And here's something that's really different. You see Job, Psalms, and Proverbs under the poetical books. Then there'll be 5 scrolls. I'm going to say this wrong, I bet, but the Megillat. All right, you see some poetry, Song of Songs. You see Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, and Esther. And then at the very end, I'm sorry, I got Daniel listed twice. Take Daniel out of the former prophets over there. He's in the historical writings. You got Daniel, Ezra, and Nehemiah are combined into one book. And then down at the very end of the Hebrew Bible is the book of Chronicles. So when you think about Chronicles, this is a summation, a history that's basically winding up the whole Old Testament. We don't get that relevance in the Christian New Testament, Old Testament sections that we look at, but to the Jewish Hebrew Bible, this would be like the conclusion, so to speak, of how we get from Adam to the kings and then to the future king, the Messianic king that will return, all right? Now, back to just a little more background. You remember the first 9 chapters are just a genealogy that goes forward. Well, I just want to take you back to Jacob because that's where the 12 sons of Jacob come, the 12 tribes of Israel. All right, why is that important to us? Well, 2 tribes are basically emphasized in the genealogy of Chronicles and in the coming story, and that's Levi and Judah. Why are they the ones emphasized? Well, because Levi is the line of the priesthood, right? Aaron will be born. The priests will come through that line at God's command. There'll be a Levitical priesthood where the priests are born into the priesthood, right? Well, there's a theme in Chronicles that'll say, we're anticipating a new temple. Remember that the temple has been wiped out by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians when they were taken into exile and the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem. All right, so what about rebuilding the temple? That's going to be one of the themes. And then the other theme to consider in the book of Chronicles will be the theme of the Messianic king. And you remember, Jesus comes through Judah. So does King David. So we'll see that develop as the chronicler, I think that's how I would refer to the author, teaches us about what's going on in the book. So now we're going to head into chapter 10, and it's going to basically start us with the history that we've read largely in Samuel and Kings. The difference being, though, now we need to pay attention because there will be additions and subtractions. Normally speaking, or generally speaking, I should say, the stories that paint David in a negative light that we might find in Kings or Samuel, these stories, like his committing adultery with Bathsheba, killing Uriah, her husband, these kind of stories are not found in Chronicles. The stories of King David are now very positive. And so as we go through it, we'll look at what is retold and basically very similar to Samuel and Kings, and what is taken out or put in addition. We will find some stories here that have a little extra. But here we go today, 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 1. Now the Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell slain on Mount Gilboa. Again, this recalls the battles of the Promised Land. The Philistines pressed hard after Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. Again, notice we don't have anything in here about Saul's propensity to try to kill David, all the detail added. Previously, we just have the blunt, straight up, let's get to it. Saul's sons are dead, and by the time the chapter keeps going, the fighting grew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him. Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and abuse me." But his armor-bearer was terrified and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. So we see the suicide of Saul happening like it was told to us before. But again, there's not a lot of embellishment. There's no detail really. When the armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died. So Saul and his 3 sons died, and all his house died together. So the elimination of King Saul and his line is where chapter 10 begins, by just telling us he's out of the way. All right, what happens after that? Well, when all the Israelites in the valley saw that the army had fled and that Saul and his sons had died, they abandoned their towns and fled, and the Philistines came and occupied them. Again, we see that the Israelites taking the promised land is not complete at all. In fact, their enemies have been allowed to repossess the land, at least some of the land. And now the kingdom of Israel is going to suffer the humiliation at the hands of the Philistines. The next day when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They stripped him and took his head and his armor and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news among their idols and their people. We've learned that previously. They put his armor in the temple. Well, just back up a minute. Why did they take his head and his armor? They're telling the Philistine people that their idols are stronger than God, right? Because they've achieved this victory and they've humiliated Saul through cutting off his head and putting it up on the wall, right? They put his armor in the temple of their gods and hung his head in the temple of Dagon. That's their idol, their false god. Okay, the story pursues from there. It says, when all the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard of everything the Philistines had done to Saul, what happens? All their valiant men went and took the bodies of Saul and his sons and brought them to Jabesh. Then they buried their bones under the great tree in Jabesh, and they fasted 7 days. So Saul is said to have a proper burial, so to speak, after he is taken off the wall of the Philistine idol Dagon's temple and brought to Jabesh. All right, so there is some honor due to the first king of Israel, but now we see as this chapter ends why God moved against Saul. And here's a lesson for us, I think, to just understand some of the key components of walking with God. So the chronicler wants to make sure we're aware of how this all happened. Saul died because, and the next verse and a half is a listing of what caused his death. Well, he was unfaithful to the Lord. What does that mean? He wasn't wholeheartedly devoted. He wasn't willing to follow. He did not keep the word of the Lord. In other words, God was clear in his instruction, but Saul, for whatever reason, didn't assume that he should do what the God of heaven was telling him to do. What does that tell you? There's a lack of humility. There's a lack of submission. There's a lack of understanding in who he's dealing with. Who among us is going to defeat God's plan, and who among us is going to survive if we do what God says don't do, or we don't do what he tells us to do, right? Well, Saul doesn't seem to grasp that. He's unfaithful to the Lord. He does not keep the word of the Lord. He will not obey. He even consults a medium for guidance, if you remember. The chronicler brings that up again to show us how far to the dark side King Saul actually went. Remember when he tries to call Samuel up from the dead to find out what to do? He's not depending on God. He's not searching out the truth for himself. He's really lost and pursuing evil things. He even consulted a medium for guidance, and he did not inquire of the Lord. You want to know how to get on God's bad side? Well, you just got to disobey him at every turn. You just got to look at what he says and say, no, I'm not going to do it. And then you can turn to other sources of spiritual information, no matter how false and evil they might be, and pursue them. And for sure, you don't want to ask the Lord anything. Oh, okay. Well, this is why Saul died, according to 1 Chronicles 10, because his wickedness was something that God was not going to tolerate. So it's very interesting here. I want you to just see this before we go today. So the Lord put him to death. The Lord put him to death. Okay, wait a minute. Wouldn't we just say, well, wait, we just read about the Philistines. They're the ones that put him to death. They got him in battle, and he committed suicide, but, they had injured him, and they captured his dead body, and it was those guys, right? Well, just understand that the Bible's happy to say that the Lord is behind the circumstances that cause various outcomes. And so, yeah, the Philistines caused the death of Saul in terms of their attack and their wounding him and his making the decision to kill himself. But it was all the plan of God. The Lord put him to death. And what else did the Lord do? He turned the kingdom over to David, son of Jesse. Understand, circumstances might not show you that God is moving. Oh, we just lost King Saul. He died in battle. Oh, okay. Well, understand that underneath that is God himself moving, and the chronicler is now going to put us in a position where we're going to see King David as we move forward from here in a new light. He is the king that will be emphasized now for many, many chapters. Church, I pray that we learn this well and understand that this is like a summation at the end of the Hebrew Bible to help us understand the character of God, the plan of God, and the salvation of God coming through the Messianic King that's been promised. God bless you, church. Serve him well today.
Who is it who for sinners shed his blood, and now for cleansing all can plunge beneath that flood? It's Jesus. But do you know who he is? He's the image of the invisible